Joining me now, first class father, Doc Brown. Welcome to First Class Fatherhood.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. Let's start like this. This could take up most of the show, but how many kids do you have? How old are they?
8, and they range from 21 to 33.
Wow, yeah, very cool. I got 4 myself, so I'm halfway there. We got 3 boys and then the girl. So if we didn't get the girl on the 4th try, we'd be trying to catch up to you, but we're safe and sound where we are.
We have 4 boys, 4 girls.
Wow, even split. Nice. If you could, please just take a second to hit my listeners with a little bit about your background and what you do.
Sure. I'm a clinical psychologist, master teacher, parent coach, parent expert, but most importantly, one of God's many children.
Yeah, and that's the key to it. So take me back, if you could, to the beginning of this fatherhood journey. About how old were you when you very first became a father, and how did that experience change your perspective on life?
Well, it changed my perspective on life based on the fact that my mom and dad divorced after 20-something years when I was 2 years old. 5 children. My dad woke up one day and said he didn't want it anymore. And kind of wish he had waited till I'd grown up to become a clinical psychologist, because I would have helped him with his midlife crisis. But the issue was my grandparents stepped in my life pretty much afterwards, more so. They were farmers. So much of who I am today is based on lessons that I learned on a farm. When my dad left, we moved to the inner city for a while, getting in trouble in the inner city. I went to the farm, but I really wanted to live there after a while. So I became a father in college. I was at the College of William and Mary, and I met the most beautiful, the most intelligent woman that I'd ever met in my life. I'm from Virginia. She's from New York. And I became a father as a sophomore in college. And it was not necessarily terrifying, but it definitely wasn't something that was in the plan. My grandfather, my grandma, my mother, my uncles all helped me deal with remaining in college, getting a job, full-time job, while being a full-time student at a very rigorous college, the College of William and Mary. And also, my wife now, but she was my girlfriend then, Marla, talked with her dad. And he was probably the most understanding and compassionate adult outside of my granddad that I'd met at the time, where he said, you and Marla didn't plan this. However, you were doing adult things, and as a result, this is what could happen, and it did. And he wanted to know my plan. And I told him that I was going to be the best dad ever. And what was surprising is that he said that I didn't have to marry his daughter. And I told him I was in love with her, and she said she was in love with me. So the marriage didn't take place right away, but it did take place, and we're married to this day.
Wow, incredible story, Doc. And you know, it is the thing I harp on the most here on this podcast is the fatherless crisis that we have going on in our country, with so many kids growing up without a father. Now, you've obviously found that positive male role model in your life growing up with your grandfather, for one. But it's the kids that are not finding those positive male role models. Some of them find it in a coach through sports. Some find it in a teacher. Some find it in the military. But it's the ones that are finding it in the street. This is the reason why we are filling up the prison systems in this country with fatherless young men. And in my opinion, it's the number one social issue I think we have going on in our country. What's your take?
Yes, I think it ranks definitely in the top 3. And unlike, young people finding a role model, a physical role model in a coach or a teacher, I also think that God provides a very strong example of what it means to be a good father. One of the things that helps me be the compassionate, empathic father that I am today is when my children mess up, I often think of how God feels when I mess up and how that must crush his heart. So, I think we sometimes don't add that variable of when we talk about children with role models. We have a faith that exists that is actually the perfect example.
Yeah, and if you combine that too, if you have the Heavenly Father removed from your life or never introduced into your life, and you have no
Yes.
father in the home physically, those two things are they are very detrimental. And so I'm a man of faith. I have three altar boys. My three boys are altar boys. We pray every day before we eat dinner, and I think. And all the studies show, too, that if the father brings their child to church, the major impact that has on that child going, whether or not the mom goes or not. And if the mom goes and the father doesn't go, the stats show that the kids do not continue into adulthood going to church and improving on their faith and sticking with it. And I think you're right. I think the fact that God is missing from so many lives of our youth, that combination of the Heavenly Father and the physical father, boy, that's ripping through our country like a time bomb.
Definitely. The Office of Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention, OJJDP.org, actually cited that having or knowing for young people, having something that's bigger and greater in their life. Now, of course, they didn't name it, but of course, we could both, discern who they were talking about, what they were talking about, that having that protective factor was a huge correlation to not entering the juvenile justice arena.
Yeah, and listen, I'm a recovering alcoholic and addict myself, and I know that's one of the major things is having the higher power. So for some people, they choose whatever it may be. For me, it's Christ, and for me, it's different for everybody, but it is, like you said, that higher power. So you allude to that, however it may be.
Exactly.
So I think it's so important, and I know that you just did the parent test, which I think is so important to have the highlight. This is what I try to do, Doc, on this show, is bring all these high profile people on here that are known for winning Academy Awards, winning Super Bowl MVPs, but it's really through the experience of becoming a father that's given them any real fulfillment in life. I mean, those are the stories I try to capture here on the show. So I'm glad to see there's a show dedicated to this. What was your experience here with the parent test, and what is the impact it's making on parents out there?
Well, my experience was the fact that it started a very needed national conversation on the importance of parenting, good parenting, whereby parents are responsible for loving their children, challenging them, making sure they're healthy, engaged, safe, and supported. When parents do that, children have a much better likelihood of being successful in life. So that's what this show was about to me. And seeing the various parenting styles and being able to provide assistance and guidance when I saw that those styles weren't necessarily consistent with a positive future for their child.
And one of the key parts of this is the discipline portion, which has changed so much over the years. So I'm curious about you with 8 kids. What type of disciplinarian are you as a father? And is that different than the discipline style you grew up with?
No, I'm very disciplined style that I grew up with. Pretty much my mother, my uncles, my grandparents were pretty much, they believed in guarding and guiding with lots of love. They believed in being firm and kind. And when I say firm, understanding that every single child, even they may not ask for it, every child needs consistency, structure, limits, and boundaries. And that's become more important now than ever before. I tell parents, all parents, that your child shouldn't hear no the first time outside of your home. So, a child hearing no in school and they can't take it and they have a tantrum. A child hearing no with law enforcement and they don't comply. That's a big deal. So parents, it starts at home. And, I would be pejorative in saying or thinking that every child comes from a home. I know that some children are rearing their own siblings. So I get that. But the fact of the matter is schools can't do it alone. Society can't do it alone. That foundation, that home foundation, that's what I say is the number one issue in society. Not necessarily the fatherless crisis. That's in the top 3. But the number one is the fraction, the fragmented home environment today.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Growing up myself, I was one of these guys where if, God forbid, I broke a window in a building, I would rather the police catch me than my father get me. Because exactly. I was in trouble. And when that is removed, when that kind of, and some people will argue about that, you shouldn't have to fear, but there's a fine line with fear and respecting and love, all encapsulated in the fatherhood role. And I'll be honest, all these guys, I would say 9 out of every 10 that I've interviewed on this show, Doc, when I ask them the discipline portion of the question, they'll say, oh, it's much different. I grew up with the spanking, with the switch, with the belt, and I don't do that to my kids. And so there's been a shift. And I think a lot of that has to do with, too, maybe not being able to, wanting to admit openly in a public platform that they do spank their children, because today it's so highly looked down upon. And obviously there's a big difference between spanking a child and beating a child. And also, too, every child receives discipline and needs to be disciplined in different ways. Spanking doesn't work for all kids.
Well, let's mention the fact, too, that I travel the world giving master classes. There are many school districts that still allow spanking in our country. Georgia is a state where, so I'm not saying that it's right or wrong. I am saying that, do we have other options? Of course. But the bottom line is, to truly curb negative behavior, antisocial behavior, maladaptive behavior, you have to be able to get your child's attention. Every child is different. So at that point, the parent is the authority. The parent has to decide how best to get that child's attention. So I grew up very similar to the gentleman that you were talking about. Guess what? My children grew up very similar to the way I grew up. I know the law. I know psychology. I know child development. And I think that many of the things that we've removed from parenting has been detrimental. And when you say fear, and I understand that, but I'd like to say like a reverence. My grandfather disciplined me. I was getting in fights all the time. I was being bullied, but he was wanting me to have impulse control. But the way that reverence went with my granddad, it wasn't one of those things where when I got in trouble, I can't tell my grandfather. It was when I got in trouble, I got to tell my grandfather. So yeah, there was a balance, and he knew that balance. I knew he loved me. I knew he wasn't doing anything to steal my fun as a child. He wanted me to have opportunities that he didn't have, and he did his best. And unlike some of the contestants on the show who are trying to parent differently than they were parented, I actually parented very similar, and I thought they were extremely successful.
Yeah, and that is the point, too. All out of those people that I did say that I asked, they all turned out to be very successful through that. And what's interesting, too, what you say there is the same Hebrew word for fear. It can be translated to revere as well. So it's like it is such an important piece of it. And an interesting thing that I want to get your take that's facing so many parents today is obviously, and I'm almost there myself with it because my oldest is a junior in high school, is college right now. Because while right now so many parents are still paying their college debt, they're trying to save for their kids to go to college to kind of repeat the same cycle again that they're doing. What advice do you have for the parents out there right now that are right there getting ready to look at colleges, and they're seeing all these people coming forward begging for someone to help them pay off their college debt? Are we sending these kids into just a detriment? Are we going to bury them in college debt? What is the best way to approach? Is college necessary to succeed in today's world? What's your take on it?
No, college is not necessary to succeed. Every child, I need everyone to know this, every child is a study of one. Research, they're bumpers. Okay, they give us an idea, but every child, that's what makes parenting so hard, being a dad so hard. Every child is a study of one. So knowing that every child is a study of one, why would we cram college down a child's throat? I did a master's thesis on the fact that in high school, I was the first person in my family of 5 to graduate high school. I was terrified. Everybody else knew what they wanted to do. I didn't. I had no role models for this college thing that my counselor kept talking about. I wrote my dissertation once I got to college on this question. I said, after college, as educators, as parents, as guardians, we have to make sure that the children know the 3E approach in society, after high school. 3E, you can be employed, you can be enlisted, or you can be enrolled. And it's important to understand that one is no better than the other.
Wow, that's incredible too, and there's such a confusion too with thinking that the college degree equals education. It's not the same, because if you are hungry for the knowledge, you can find it. If you seek, you will find it. Right? If you knock, the doors will open to you. It's not a matter of just going through the motions and getting the piece of paper, and
Right,
now you're educated, like the Scarecrow in the Wizard of Oz gets the diploma. And, hey, now I have a brain.
right,
It doesn't
right.
seem to work that way, but there seems to be that confusion, as if like it's just following the same patterns. And I would love to see that get disrupted, because there's so many other ways today, especially with this internet, with the access that we have
Yes,
to media. The opportunities have never been greater, I feel, for the young men and women that are coming through the system.
definitely. And I got to tell you that what research is showing us and telling us about parents today is that parents are extremely concerned that, based on the way things are now, particularly in higher education, college, that their children will never reach the level of success that they've reached. Now, that's sad.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no doubt about it, and I'm a railroad mechanic. That's what I've been doing for a job. I've been over 2 decades. I've been doing that, and it's interesting to see the paths that my children are choosing to go. Some getting involved in mechanics, like I have.
Yeah,
Others that now are, and one of the things too, just like you said, how every kid is a study of one. All the
yeah,
my four are completely different. I would imagine
yes,
all 8 of yours are completely different. Well, one
that's
thing
right.
that I found with my teenagers that has been helpful to my wife and I is the book, the 5 Love Languages by Chapman. Not only for my wife and I, but we've done it with our teenagers. And boy, was that such an eye-opening experience to see. We were like, wow, we totally were wrong on the way our kids were giving and receiving love.
That's right. That's right. Understanding that they're a study of one, that their love language may be touch, their language may be service, their love language may be gift giving, communication. So it's important to know not only your children's love language. There's another part of the personalities that we don't necessarily talk about today, and that's whether or not an individual is an introvert or an extrovert or an ambivert. And it's not about shyness for introversion. It's about where you get your energy. So when you know the person that you're parenting, when you know the person that you're married to, when you know that sometimes they re-energize being alone and they crave solitude and silence, and you might be an extrovert who always wants to be out in the midst of things, those are important as well. So once we know the love languages, and once we know how people energize, and it just helps us all get along better.
I'm fascinated by it all. That's why I love being a dad. It's some of the things I just have to chalk up to when I see them doing. I'm like, boy, that's fascinating that they do it this way. There's no other way to really explain it sometimes. And I wish too that the messaging in this country would be. That's one of the things. Also, one of the gigs I do is a part-time Uber driver. Done thousands of trips. Talked to so many young men. And whenever I tell them I have 4 kids, they look at me like I got 4 heads. I can only imagine what you get. And today, years ago, families in this country were a lot bigger, and they lived in smaller places. Today, they have
Right.
smaller families, and we live in bigger places. And it seems like
Right.
somewhere along the line, the young men, especially, have gotten this idea or this fear that getting married, starting a family, having kids is going to somehow ruin their life. And we need that message to get out that this is the goal to shoot for. This is the most
Yes.
important thing you're going to do. And that's why I love the fact that they have a show, The Parent Test, that you're out there, because we need to encourage these young men to get started and get moving early.
Well, the research for young men being married actually is actually positive, where it improves our health. We live longer in healthy marriages. The research shows that women are also helped, but not nearly as much as a man. It gives us a sense of stability and so many other wonderful things. I think it goes back again to, what did an individual's family look like for them? And that family structure, when that broke, there were many other things that society just followed suit. So we have to get back to basics. As men, we're more than protectors and providers. We have to nurture. We have to love. We have to show emotion. And it's important, so important, that we tell our children without a doubt that there's nothing they could ever do to make us stop loving them. If it's drugs, if it's violence, if it's those things that they do to get off the course, we let them know there's nothing they could ever do to make us stop loving. Doesn't mean we won't be disappointed, but it's nothing they could ever do to make us stop loving them. Everyone is redeemable. So that's another message that fathers, we need to incorporate into what we're saying and what we're showing to our children.
Yeah, very well said, Doc. And I would love to just like a call to the dads out there that have abandoned their responsibilities as fathers to come back, because it would almost be like the story of the prodigal son, where, you know, the dads that are there doing their thing every day, they don't need that pat on the back or that recognition. But the one that's been lost and is now found, boy, will our society rejoice. So that's why I love the message and what you're doing. Obviously, the parent test is one. What are you working on now? What's next? What's coming up for you?
Well, what's next? We're in talks of a Doc Brown midday daytime show.
Wow. Awesome stuff. Congrats on that. Looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Last thing I want to hit you with here, I love to ask all the dads that I get on the podcast, what type of advice, I know you covered it a little bit here as we were talking about, what kind of advice do you have for that brand new dad out there or that about to be father who's listening?
A brand new dad, know that, and I'm going to say something that's not popular, but I want people not to be surprised, because most fatherhood experts, so to speak, won't say it. But good parenting, being a great father, can be inconvenient. And that's part of the course. So you won't get every round of golf in if that's what you do. Going to the gym may take a back seat to going to your child's recital or game, baseball game. So I want to throw those out there, because television, Hallmark, and all these other things make parenting seem just so wonderful. And it is. Without a doubt, it is. But there's a whole lot that isn't said. And sometimes when we run into those barriers and those brick walls, sometimes fathers want to give up. I'm letting you know that it's going to be challenging, but that's a part of being a father.
Wow. Very well said. I love the message. This has been an honor for me. I got to say, Doc Brown, you're a first-class father all the way, and thank you so much for giving me a few minutes of your time on First Class Fatherhood.
I appreciate you. Keep doing that great work.